Okay, let's kick it off by just sort of jumping in and saying, you've been a bunch of roles in your life. You've had like a bunch of things, vice president of marketing at MTV, MC overalls, House of Opportunity. Oh, but there's a bunch of other things. How did where did it all start? How did you get into those things? What was the beginning of the story for you?
Prince. Prince was the beginning and end of the story. So I think I was about 14 and a half when I went to see Purple Rain at my local cinema. And it was the same week I'd been to see Blade Runner. And I found Blade Runner unremittingly dark and
Yeah.
miserable. And I found Purple Rain a deeply religious experience. And I guess I knew who Prince was, but I hadn't really, because I was a big fan of 1999 and that album, but I hadn't really experienced Prince in the way that Purple Rain made me experience Prince. Anyway, so so I saw that show, and then he played just after Around the World in a Day came out. He played a show at Wembley Arena in 1985, 6. So I must have been 15. And I convinced my mother to buy tickets, but she wasn't going to let me go alone because clearly I was way too young to travel into town to go and see it. So she convinced my cousin, who was a major in the Gurkhas, to escort me
Wow.
with military might to go to Wembley
Wow.
to see Prince. And it genuinely changed everything for me. And so it sort of opened up a whole new world. So up until that point, I'd been an avid listener of things like John Peel
Yeah.
between the hours of 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. when I was at school. Had discovered all sorts of weird and wonderful music through Peel, with The Fall and Butthole Surfers and Pixies and all sorts of weird and wonderful American bands and things that just and reggae and all sorts of things that opened my mind. And then I saw Prince in the middle of that, which was about about as pop as it could get. But it demonstrated to me what an alternative path might look like, where you have built sufficient confidence in yourself and understood your talents well enough to
Mm,
be anything you wanted to be.
mm.
And so that for me, that was the sort of start of a notion of my self and career that I wanted, which meant that when I left school and I went to university to study philosophy, which was deeply influenced by the conversation I had with my economics teacher the day after seeing Prince, where against my Catholic upbringing, I said, have you got a few minutes? Because I was clearly buzzing about the show the night before. And we ended up spending 2.5 hours in this very deep conversation about the fact that Prince was the closest manifestation to godliness that I had ever experienced. And what he stood for and how he was his own man and exploring stuff became absolutely fundamental to then what I studied. And then when I started university, I dropped all of my kind of the sort of formative expectation driven stuff around the way I had to study and sports. I was an avid rower and all the kind of discipline around that, and just wanted to explore. So university time for me was all about exploration of lots of other sides of me, and that influenced my career. My whole starting point was Prince.
Wow.
Strange, really, but it's and his pathway followed my pathway. Admittedly, and I would say this about myself, to some extraordinarily bad dead ends, right? And terrible cul-de-sacs that he found in his career. But that desire to permanently kind of pivot and explore and reinvent um, has been fundamental to my very squiggly career, and it
Mm.
was inspired by him.
That's amazing though that just like listening to music could do that. I suppose like, what you're talking about is more than just career and stuff. I think it's almost like more it's life choices, and it's a personal, it's affected you personally, hasn't it? Just seeing something live, something that's really inspiring. Um, are there any other artists that are doing that today for you, or is there anything that like that now that you see? Does that experience happen regularly throughout the journey for you, or is that it? Did it all begin there and end there?
No. It's happened many times. So I was lucky enough to go to school with Radiohead,
Wow,
and
wow,
therefore spent a lot of time with Tom doing art. I'm not as old as Tom. I shouldn't say that, should I? But anyway, I was a few years younger than Tom. But he was the kind of slightly strange punk fellow who'd come into art classes and sort of disrupt things and talk about politics, etc. I never really understood what he was going on about, but I absolutely got what Radiohead was about. So Radiohead, in terms of the way they ploughed their own path, really formative for me. I famously at university, when I was running the music part of the university rag, and they'd just been signed by Parlophone, had released their first EP, which shamefully I found in a local record store in Nottingham, literally boxes upon boxes of both the vinyl and the CD of their first EP, which was the Drill EP. And I ended up buying a box of them to give to people to go, I went to school with this band, a bit like the Pixies, but they're better. And then I wrote about them and said that they were a terrible jazz funk band at school. And at which point Johnny and Tom insisted that they were never going to speak to me again. So I ended up getting fended off to Ed from then on in. So I really didn't do myself any favors by reference past. And yeah, it's gone all the way through. So the person that I am mildly obsessed with, and it's not because I'm right now, and it's not because I'm necessarily obsessed with his music. I'm obsessed with him because of what he represents in terms of youth, and my son is deeply obsessed with him, and therefore I'm sort of vicariously watching how music is influencing my son. Is an 18-year-old from North Carolina called Glaive. His real name is Ash Gutierrez, and my son insisted that he wanted to go to his first ever London show, and so of the 800 tickets, I was the last person to buy a ticket. On the night at the door, I convinced them to let me in as a sort of slightly aging hipster.
Wow.
And it totally blew my mind because there were 799 other kids who were probably between the age of, so that he was 17 at that point. So Glaive was 17, as was my son. So probably the ages of 16 to 18.
Wow.
Absolutely mental in a room in London. And I've never felt energy like it since I went to see Prince.
Wow.
Something different. And we've just been to see him again play the Camden Ballroom, and he said it was the biggest show he'd ever played, which is probably about 1,500 cap. And once again, and at the end of the show, so he's a kind of emo stroke hyper pop stroke somewhat kind of hip hop dance thing going on. And at the end of the show, he stepped out into the crowd, and a circle pit. And
yeah, I saw it. I saw it.
I shared it on
I saw it.
LinkedIn as much as Instagram, and it was bananas, right? He said, I'm done. You can take me out. And the euphoria in the room was something else. So it's people like him that I still go, at the age of 52, I look at those young people and go, wow, they are fearless. There is no industry logic for them. I mean, actually, he's signed to Interscope, but he might as well not be. There is no industry logic for him. He is all about sharing. He's all about building a private network. He has a private Instagram account that my son is on that I've tried to access and he won't let me in. All sorts of things, and I, through Discord and kind of DM back channel streams, all sorts of things. And the beauty of Glaive is that every time he makes anything in his bedroom, he's immediately sharing it, and he's mouthing the words, he's sharing it immediately with his audience. And I go back to Prince, I got the sense that every time he was in Paisley Park in his studio, that he was permanently creating, but it's very rare that we got to hear it. And I used to hear it by buying bootlegs and things.
Yeah.
And sort of strange CD compilations of things that ultimately became album, kind of seminal albums like Sign of the Times, which has so many different versions.
It
was an amalgamation, a compilation of so many different projects that Prince was working on. I've got all the projects as bootleg CDs, and then to hear it culminate in this album, much the same going on with Glaive. So that kind of stuff I just find really exciting. I mean, proper shivers. I'm shivering now thinking about it.
It's amazing. So something that I think, you really taught me was exactly that thing that what you've just sort of communicated there, which was how do I get out ahead of the industry? How do I ignore an industry? And there's a kind of, especially, something I get asked all the time from students to other artists to whatever is, even artists within deals, and we've talked about this before, like where there's a machine behind the sort of the label side of things and the agents, and there's something that the manager wants and something that the agent wants, something that the label wants, something that whatever. And particularly in any other career, that might be valid where, if you want to be a dentist, then your boss wants this, and then you ascend the ranks and you go up a system and whatever. But something that I'm always referring back to is that the music industry just does not work that way. It's something that you've to quote a phrase from you, you've got to get out in front of it rather than let it lead the way and sort of entice you in. Could you talk a little bit more about that from the point of view of that helping other people in terms of getting out in front of the industry? Why is that important, and why is it the case? Why is it like that?
And I sort of have a little regret in espousing that with you, Ben, because I'm not sure it's entirely right, and it doesn't come from a righteous point. I guess, and it's partly because of middle age, you sort of start reflecting about why you are where you are and what you do. I align it to everything I do in my non-musical business world, whether that's in suicide prevention, as somebody who's been involved with campaign against living miserably for 17 years, or whether it's the kind of entrepreneurial things that I've tried and quite often failed in, the way thought about MC Overalls as a fashion brand, etc. There's a piece of logic in here, which is, for me, the kind of Venn diagram of business and culture is at its most interesting where they overlap. And that's always been something Prince is to blame for that, right? That's the bit that I find interesting. Now, where they overlap for me most often is where new categories emerge. And there's a whole kind of piece of business logic about how you define a new category. The problem is in defining a new category, whether that's in musical terms or whether that's in business terms or whether it's any kind of venture you might do, is that what people want to do is to drag you back to a position of complete safety and known. Something that is known, which has a very fixed box that you sit within, right? And therefore, how many virtual Adeles did the industry try and create when Adele first emerged?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And how many people tried to, I guess, ape some of the pop stars in the 80s, etc. How many people are trying to be the new Taylor Swift? How many people have tried to create the new Ed Sheeran, etc. So industry, in the way that it works, always tries to drag people inexorably into a place of comfort and knowledge and fixed expectation, because that's the secret of good business is predictability. So a label or an industry or an existing category would prefer people conform to the norms of that category, because then they can quantify it, good or bad, successful or fail, against known metrics and known optics of how that's worked. I think it's most interesting when you don't conform and you create a new category. Now, that's wildly ambitious and comes with a certain note of arrogance. But I think as an artist, why would your starting point be to conform? Why wouldn't you try and work out what you're about? Right. And if what you're about is I assume, an amalgamation of many, many different kind of influences, and you're a prime candidate for that, and the way you told your backstory, I guess the bit that I was trying to coach you on, and when we first met, is how do you not try and be all things to all men, but actually be really clear on what is your USP? If you're going to try and create a category of your own and not conform and be your own master and be your own artist, how do you whittle yourself down to really understanding what your core strengths are? And try and limit that to kind of three things. So I always talk about, if you throw somebody 10 tennis balls, they won't catch any of them. If you throw them 3 or maybe even 2, chances are they'll catch them.
They'll catch them, yeah.
And I think that's the truth of artistry. I think that's the truth of business. I think it's the truth in so many ways. But you have to have the gumption to go, I'm not going to conform. I'm going to try and do my own thing in my own way. That takes time. It's the long route. It's 10,000 hours. But first and foremost, you have to start with building a relationship with an audience who go, oh, this feels different. Once you build an audience like that, a fan base starts to emerge. Once you have a fan base that is really active, the people on the fringes of those fan base will start to influence the mainstream. So, prime example of that, Idols.
Yeah,
Another
yeah.
band I find thrilling. The 2 new tracks off their album coming out next year, I think it's called Thank or Thanks, speak to a punk rock band that in so many ways started in the way that many other punk rock bands started, but the way that they have cultivated a fan base has given them license through working with producers like Kenny Beats and now Nigel Godrich to go in a direction that I don't think Joe Talbot and Bowen and all the rest of the crew ever thought they would go
Ever
in.
thought would happen?
Right?
Yeah,
They have been given license to explore because they did their own thing and they plowed their own way and they did it on their own terms. They didn't wait for the industry to tap them on the shoulder. And the very fact that they're now backed by, yes, I know it's a kind of big label, but Partisan going, you do you.
yeah,
That means they're headlining big stages.
yeah, yeah,
Right. And they are able to explore. And you know, Joe has even talked about on the latest track, Grace, he's singing for the first time in a way that everybody, when he came into the studio and started singing like that, Nigel Godrich apparently was like, what?
what's this? Yeah.
You're not shouting at us? You're not
What are you doing?
and you know, and their whole ethos of, you know, yes, their shows are deeply aggressive and, you know, and cathartic, but actually it all comes from a place of love. And I remember during lockdown, or just as the first lockdown closed, I took my boy off to his first ever show, which was a show in Kingston, a funny little club in Kingston, just down the road from us. And I took him to see Idols, and I walked him straight out into the middle of the pit. And I said, now watch what happens. He doesn't like the music, it's not his thing. But I said, watch what happens in this room. And there were families in there, and there were 10-year-olds crowd surfing. And then Joe got one of the 10-year-olds who come from Bristol attached to a family that are Uber fans to crowd surf from the stage all the way to the front of house. And it was just this kind of magnificent celebration of family. And
Yeah,
you're a punk band who shout and gob and scream and
like,
swear and everything
what's
else. Like,
going on?
you know, it shouldn't make any sense, but it made glorious sense. So I think that's that whole thing of how do you create your own path, right? And let the industry get in behind you like fans, because they have the platforms and they have the muscles to enable for you to grow and to create a springboard. But if you go to them looking for that springboard, they'll tell you to get in your corner. And your corner will look like everybody else's corner. And then you're at the whims of and the mercy of them and their budgets and what they deem to be success.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you've got to build a fan base straight out the gates.
And all of them, as you said, are sort of, they're trying to, let me move everything, sun's in my eyes. All of them are trying to, as you said before, get you to conform into those categories purely and simply, not because one of the things that some of my students say is like, labels are evil, you know. And I'm like, no, they're just the bank, you know, essentially they're just financiers, essentially a load of doors to open for you. And they're great, you know, they're so important for an artist.
But
But
they are safe. And so you read about the Richard XLs and, you know, and some of the and Lawrence from Domino, when they started out launching those labels, you know, and Ivo from 4AD and stuff, they were madly unsafe.
yeah,
I mean, absolutely doing their own thing. Now, scale brings safety. The need for safety, the need for predictability, and therefore you start to conform to certain things because you know they're going to work, and they research the arse off everything because they have to, and they have data up the wazoo that tells them exactly what to be and how to be and everything else. Problem is, somewhere in the midst of all that, it's not that I think the artist loses their artistry. I just think they start to listen to the prospect of scale. And that in itself brings notions of comfort and, you know, and the ability to pay your rent and all those things that are deeply alluring.
Yeah.
But for most people are merely mirages. And the quickest thing, you know this, the quickest way to do it is to actually go out and create your own pathway and start to make that pathway work to a level that means you can sell a certain number of tickets, or you can sell a certain number of records, or whatever it might be. At that point, bringing in the big guys with the big muscles starts to make sense, but you've established your core.
Yeah. And you've done, as you said, you've done the 10,000 hours, and from everyone watching, it becomes something where it makes sense, and it makes, you know, there's a reason then, oh, here's why we should work with these people, or here's why we should even be interested, you know, in the music or whatever, because they're putting in the work and they're putting in the hours themselves and creating their identity. And you talked about a phrase, you said, roll a peanut at some point. I can't remember when I first heard that, but you've used it before quite a few times. Could you explain what that means?
I'm a sucker and indeed a bore around certain metaphors that make me understand the world, right? One of the biggest metaphors I use, and I'm now running a course that specifically talks to it, called Venture Yourself, which is about how you back yourself in order to be more yourself. If you understand yourself better, then you're less likely for the world to tell you how you should be. And I think, as a Gen X male, I was definitely born into a culture where it was me versus the world. And success was something that, in a sense, was a pathway laid out by other people to tell us what the destination should be. My view is it's almost the opposite. To be really, truly yourself, then you take a series of baby steps, and every day could be a baby step. And why do I talk about baby steps? You understand this, given your current experience with your young, is that first step that a baby makes is the most profound step they ever make, right? And it brings joy to the world in all sorts of ways. So how do you chunk your world down to a series of small steps that be profound for you, but in the grand scheme of things might seem rather childish, right? And if you can chunk it down, then the other metaphor that I use is about how that journey forward is not going to be a linear path. So if you roll a peanut, or you on a tabletop, or you roll a rugby ball, the one thing you can guarantee is it won't go in a straight line. It will flip-flop about, and it will take some strange detours. And I think that's the nature of life, growing up, careers, is unless you're prepared to accept the fact that you're going to take some strange routes left and right in order to keep progressing, you're going to endlessly be disappointed and endlessly live with the fear that you failed. So if your desire is to make the shortest, quickest, linear journey towards some destination that you think is going to bring you happiness or success or wealth or well-being, the chances are that will be thwarted. But most importantly, your journey to that place will be one filled with anxiety you're never going to quite measure up. And I think that is the absolute number one root source of most people's mental health issues, is that we live in a culture where you're defined by reaching destinations.
Yeah, absolutely.
And particularly for men. I think it's bullshit. Yeah. Men, I said on stage the other week at a thing called The Future of Men, a sort of strange conference. I said I had this kind of theory that, and it was based on watching the Beckham documentary, of all things. Inspired me to think about it, which is, isn't it interesting that Beckham's documentary is now somewhat derided? I thought it was a great piece of TV. It was very entertaining, etc., and sort of joyous to relive some of those moments because they're cultural moments. But nonetheless, the fact that his production company produced it meant that his version of his story was a somewhat romanticized version.
Of course.
Because in a sense, masculinity is so heavily defined by your last big success. You know, the partner you've just met, or your football goal you just scored, or the number one hit you might or might not have had, or the job you've just scored, or the car you just bought. Whereas women are all about what they could be ahead, right? They're all about the process of becoming. Men are about trying to secure a position of status and success at any one time, and then romantically telling people about their journey to that point. Problem is, with a lot of men, if you then swivel them around and go, well, tell me about what's ahead, they start to quake.
Interesting.
And so rolling the peanut forward is going, don't quake, just go with it. Just flip-flop around, and you will keep making progress. But don't be defined at any one time by the position you just arrived at. Be defined by what you could be next.
It's okay to be wonky.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. That's I think that's a good point to talk about. You know, the campaign for against living miserably. At what point did, you know, this is obviously something that's been really, you know, your passion for forever, as far as I know. I mean, it's something, you know, that kind of aligning your mental state and your mental health with your career aspirations and your life aspirations and things like that. At what point did you decide that you actually wanted to do that a bit more officially, for a charity and so on and so forth? And what roles have you had within the charity?
So, like most of my life, not exactly on a plan. Uh, so I was quite literally gobbing off as the marketing director of MTV on a stage, and I didn't know that at the back of the audience, it was on the day that the Labour government, had announced antisocial behavioural orders.
Right.
All over the press was the sort of general chit chat and social discourse about the fact that anybody under the age of 25 who wasn't in work was apt to no good. The very essence of wearing a hoodie meant that you were bad, right? You were innately bad, and you were the scourge of the streets, and you needed to be exterminated. No, it was getting a bit tasty. So I stood on stage and effectively ripped up my otherwise slightly boring marketing speech and talked about the fact that I thought young people actually were the source of great inspiration, and that if we only spent a bit more time paying attention to the culture of young people, then the world would be in a slightly different place. At the back of that was the founder of Calm, who had run a 3-year pilot in Manchester, had closed the NHS pilot, having successfully completed it, but had been encouraged by Tony Wilson, God bless him,
Wow.
to start the charity that is now Calm. And so she managed to get a meeting in my diary a couple of days later and turned up and wandered in. She was I don't know whether you met her actually, but she was an extraordinarily compelling activist, proper old school activist. Never really met anybody like that before.
Interesting.
Grown sort of cut her cloth and earned her scars, romping around the long grass of Green and Common. Wow. One of those kinds of people.
Yeah.
So CND, I think, and all that sort of stuff. But she turned up and literally dropped a bomb on my desk and said 11 men a day under the age of 45 died by suicide. What are you going to do about it?
Wow.
Now, whether those were exact words, I don't remember, but that's how it felt.
Yeah.
And I was kind of, in my head, I had eyes on the back of my head going, I've got this big youth culture media empire that supposedly is there to look after
young people.
I need to do something about this. And so literally within a matter of weeks, tried to do some things, and we ran an ad on air, etc. And I became a patron alongside David Baddiel, of all people, and a couple of other people. She had this kind of ragtaggle group of luminaries of sorts, in the agency, in the advertising world, and elsewhere. And it sort of grew from there. And I, within the limits of my career, I wasn't sort of massively overcommitted to spending time with the charity, but I was deeply invested in what felt like the growing strategy of the business, which was, if we could land, or a growing strategy for Jane, the founder, Jane Powell, if we could land mental health on mainstream television, 8:30 on a Monday night kind of television, so panorama level television, then it would be a short step to get suicide properly understood, because nobody believed the statistics. So we couldn't get arrested for the stats. And so the 10 years of Jane's tenure in growing that business and growing that campaign was going around effectively punching people on the nose in the politest way possible to get them to wake up to the statistic. Right. And I found myself being her kind of one of her kind of strategic advisors in growing that. And in that process, then got elected to become chair of the trustee group that effectively, from a legal point of view, has to run and govern the charity. And my starting point when I did that kind of pivot in my head around what could MTV do, it really started with, well, what's the culture of masculinity, given that 76% of suicides are men? So what is the culture of masculinity that we have to challenge to really address suicide? Because it's not a clinical solution. That doesn't mean people with extreme mental health don't step into suicidality, and there are clinical solutions to extreme mental health, but actually unfortunately, the more common understanding of people who die by suicide is they've never been in any kind of clinical relationship. They've never been near their GP with bad mental health or poor mental health or crisis. Right. What they have is they've successfully, in a sense, buried what's really going on for them. And so it catches everybody out because they didn't look suicidal.
And
So
nobody
how
knew. Yeah.
possibly have they completed suicidal ideation? And so my whole thing was culture, starting culture. And now as a business that has 62 people and is, inordinately successful in so many respects, I always maintain as the chair, we are not the answer. The 62 people in Waterloo in London are not the answer to suicide. What we can do is catalyze culture to start to explore what the answer might be.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a cultural answer. And so we built this, I regard as a phenomenal brand. We're the most awarded advertiser in the world this year. And yet we're a tiny little charity, but
Yeah.
we've able to make a suicide campaign feel welcoming and community driven and exciting and hopeful, rather than, oh, best not mention the S
Let's
word.
not talk about this. Yeah.
No.
I think the original mission, though, is certainly, from what I can see in the UK, I think it's succeeded. That, trying to get people to talk about it and to become aware, at least that there's help out there, and there's support, and there's some kind of infrastructure, and at least there's a conversation going on about it to try to understand it. I think that's more prevalent now than it ever has been, ever.
Yeah, so 10 years in, we had Simon Jack, now the BBC business editor of the BBC. He did a documentary on Panorama about his late father's suicide at the age of 40, and Simon Jack was about to turn 40, and therefore it was a moment for him. Same Stephen Manderson, otherwise known as Professor Green, did one for BBC Three, and actually there was one only recently by an amazing documentary that Ronan Kemp has just done.
Yeah,
about the death of his producer. And these are, in amongst all the work we do, the notion that there is mainstream discourse on this old thing called television, it really shows how far we've come. But still, people struggle to use the S word. They're very happy now talking about mental health. But suicide is different. It's not as knowable, and it scares people, and it's difficult to talk about. And clearly, the bereaved suffer terribly, because inevitably they start to question what could they have done differently, and
what if
about
what if
them. And
yeah, of course.
anyway,
yeah, interesting. I going back to, kind of honing your identity, and artists kind of setting linear goals for themselves. It's interesting that that would be such a strong factor in contributing to somebody's mental health, particularly just keeping it to music, and music industry people for now. What kind of things do you think musicians should do to look after their mental health, and to whether it's people that are just starting their career, or the people who are already in it and chipping away and on tours and things like that? Do you have any insights that you think are valuable in looking after yourself and being resilient in, because obviously the music industry is so tough for a lot of reasons. So yeah, do you have any insights or thoughts about that?
yeah, and again, it sounds a bit philosophical, but I have this strong belief that well, two things. At the end of the day, kind of, and I'm not going to get into that whole kind of gratitude chat because I'm not sure I subscribe to that. But anyway, the notion that you reflect at the end of every day and celebrate the small things that might have been achieved in a single day. You might have had a moment of clarity about a lyric. You might have just written a lick that you didn't, or a chord progression, or you've just played a show where one song suddenly took off and you got into flow, right? Even if the rest of the set was dog shit, one song, or there was one super fan who suddenly collared you afterwards and expressed their fandom in a way that you hadn't seen before. Celebrating the little things, the energy that will give you as fuel to keep going, I think is really, really important. Because again, it's a bit like in business, the belief that you have to have 100 million followers from day one and you're turning over billions of pounds. I mean, it's just for the birds, right? So you celebrate the small things. If you reflect on that every day, then I think the first thing that happens is hopefully you sleep a bit better, right? And less filled with anxiety about what you are or are not achieving. But then most importantly, when you wake up in the morning, and I think to have a very clear routine, right? The routine that says you've got things to achieve in a day and you structure your day to go through a routine. My hero right now is Nick Cave for that very reason. In terms of the way he's broadened his profile, and he's no longer just about a sort of strange gothic singer and writer. He becomes something much more than that. He's going to create a ministry around him. He talks very specifically about the routine he follows, his work routine. I think every artist could learn a bit from that. But the starting point for that is clearing your mind for a beat every morning. And it might only take you 30 seconds to go, what do I want out of today? Not out of tomorrow, out of today. And how do I get real clear intention in my head that you can then carry lightly through the day? Because I guarantee you that clarity will be rewarded. And that you know, great moments of inspiration or great moments of feedback from the world will find you if you are clear in your intent. If you are chaotic in your intent because you're still reeling from the beer the night before or whatever has happened overnight, or the lack of sleep, you will be chaotic in the world, and the world will reward your chaos with chaos. Right. So there's something about that overnight, and you know, understanding the power of sleep and what it does for you, and how you do your filing in the middle of the night, or at least your brain is doing its filing in the middle of the night. Having clarity about reflecting on the day's moments of little triumphs, and then being clear in your intent the next day is really the starting point, because I think structure flows from that.
That's really interesting, and I think certainly for new artists as well, as every bit as much as the ones that are currently out there and just on the road and stuff as we speak, the industry's so, as we put it before, wonky that it's almost kind of quite difficult to have a one size fits all answer for it. But I definitely the intention to go out and have some, or to recognize at least some of the achievements that you already have done even before you've eaten your breakfast. You know, I think it's so important. I know that certainly I you know, that's a factor in some of the things that I do. And you know, just seeing the progress that I have done, and kind of, you know, giving yourself a little tap on the back and saying, do you know what, you've done all this, and that's really good. That's really, really, you know, you should be really proud of yourself, you know.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've pulled your leg about over the years is this notion that you're a one-man industry, and I think it is that spirit of you only make your own destiny, right? Nobody else is going to lean in until you've got clarity about what you're prepared to put in. And some of the people that I've met along the way in the music industry, I think, wait for their management or wait for the system to tell them they're going to be all right. And my view is, well, that's not good for your mental health. B, chances are they're not going to look after you because they're not that interested. They're not that invested. Even if they put 200,000 quid into your advance, they're not that invested, right? You've got to find it from yourself. And the other thing that I say, which is true of all parts of business, is get out into, you know, I call it get your feet wet. Get out into the stream, get into conversations. And you're the king of this, right? Go and inveigle your way into conversations. Don't fear being the imposter. Be proud of who you are and what you're about. And if you're an artist because you think you're a good songwriter and you're a good performer and whatever version of artist that is, tell people you're an artist, right? Don't go, oh well, I'm you know, I work in a shop. I record some music on the side. No. And it's not that artistry defines all parts of your world, because some, you know, you've got to earn. But the fact that you have clarity within yourself that actually what you feel is that you're an artist and you have to earn, it changes the way you go into a conversation. And I think getting into those conversations and not being afraid to kind of talk about your point of view as an artist. What do you see in the world? Why is that compelling? Why is that going to inform a
that's important just for music writing as well, you know, just for, you know, when you understand who you are and what you know what you think you're good at, that absolutely starts to inform the way you even just write the music and the way you record the music as well. And you know, what, just looking behind you, who have you got, you know, have you got a sort of a short list of artists that you think do that the best? Obviously Prince is one of them. Do you have any, you know, and Glaive as well, Do you have any others that, you think are personal highlights, that you kind of often refer to, or,
Are you talking
yeah,
about over
over
my
your history
history
and
or
over your shoulder
of?
behind you?
Oh yeah, well, legacy media behind me. Um, yeah, I mean, frankly, all the people that I think have that are doing things that kind of explore the fringes. So I'm obsessed with what was dubbed as a Serbian steel worker and is now being revealed as an Italian composer called Abel Mogard, who does very dark ambient music, but I think he is exploring sound in a way that really excites me. The way Mark Hollis took a 80s pop act and turned it into this very strange kind of chamber experimental outfit in Talk, that it's truly inspirational. And it's funny, I've never really been that taken with the
Right.
music. It's not something I go back to regularly, but I love what it stands for, and I love the fact that he had the
Mm,
gumption to go there. And there are passages in all of their albums, Laughing Stock, etc., which are absolutely glorious. But I don't stay with it for that long. I'll put it on, but I can't stay with it for that long. Sonic
yeah.
Youth, because they just, they took guitars into a completely different, and Daydream Nation is still one of the greatest works I think ever recorded. Some of the hip hop stuff, and I don't necessarily just mean the kind of Kendricks of the world. There's an artist called Aesop Rock that I've always been obsessed with because I think his wordplay is second to none, and he's a real thinker. His wordplay speaks to the way he thinks about things. Currently obsessed with this strange sludge noise rock band from the US called Chat Pile, who I think are extraordinary. A band called The Makeup with a leader called Ian Svenonius, who plays with sort of black music, R&B, soul, gospel. It's called the Gospel Yeah Yeah Sound. His command on stage is second to none. Yeah, just a world of people that I think explore stuff in a
Mm.
really interesting way.
Nice, nice, nice. It's
Yeah.
whenever we'd be on text, you'd always be sending me stuff, and I'd be getting notifications. I'd be like, "Who the fuck is that?" And there'd be so many artists where I'd be like, "Yeah, I know that, and I know that," and I'd be like, "Who?" And I'm like, "How do you find these people? Do you just trail through Spotify, or is it going in stuff live, or what is it?
No,
How do you search for new music?"
no, I have literally tens of thousands of magazines. So I read music magazines really avidly, like
Right.
cover to cover, and I try and join dots. But ever since I started collecting music, which was back in the days of Prince, back in '85 or '84 or something, when I started collecting music, um, it's the sort of joining the dots between musical genres, and the fact that shoegazing is back. That was my genre from the '90s, and now it's, in many respects, the new music that's coming through shoegaze
Right.
is better
Yeah.
than the original. But no, My Bloody Valentine's Loveless again was a complete, or Radiohead's Kid A. I love the fact that
Yeah.
nobody saw that coming. And you go, well, hold on a minute. I thought I knew this act. And then suddenly they take a hard right into somewhere that it's just so remarkable. I then followed that line. So when Kid A came out, Tom York was all permanently talking about Warp as a label, and Autechre, and Aphex Twin, etc. And I was already pretty conversant with that music, but it meant if that's where Tom had got to, I went even further. Deep in the weeds of ambient music and noise and all that sort of stuff. So I'm just
Yeah,
curious.
of
I go
course.
down rabbit holes.
I'm mindful of the time, James. So let's wrap it up with just like a final kind of, for especially this is aimed at just kind of new artists and people who are, currently just strumming the guitar in the bedroom or coming up with a few chords, or maybe they've got some songs together and whatever. What would you say is like some good, healthy tips for the industry, for what, not even for the industry, but for taking that to the next level and for going forward with it? And what would you say is like a good healthy couple of things, to pointers to do?
Uh, do it for yourself. Share it. So share it with your mates. Get your mates talking about it, and they'll take the piss to start with.
Hmm.
and then they'll realize you mean it, right? And once the word gets out that you mean it, they will start to open doors for you because they will be interested in your success. I don't use it, but clearly TikTok. So
Yeah.
the notion of taking you as a performer into a world that is a storytelling world that relishes short bursts of entertainment, funny, compelling content. So using socials not because you're trying to market yourself, but because you want to engage with some people with stuff that you're doing.
Hmm.
It comes back to the age-old thing. Tell your story, be proud of your story, and tell it in whatever channel you can. Because if it's true to you, you will always stand up and be counted against that story, and you feel a deep sense of responsibility and ownership of that story. If you do that right, then I think suddenly scouts, people like you, Ben, connectors start to hear about you, gather around you, lend their support, whether that's on a charitable basis or because they want to make money out of you. In a sense,
Hmm.
two sides of the same coin, as far as I'm concerned. They start to lean in. But the beginning and end of that is finding the resources of confidence in your own art, recognizing that from day one you are far from a finished product. So you have to just keep exploring your art.
Mm.
Doing the 10,000 hours and not being afraid to stand in a room where there's only one person listening, but going through with it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
well, I could convert this one person. If I could only convert the barman,
Yeah.
it's
Then
worth the
brilliant.
gig. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because the chances are the barman will start talking to the booker, and the booker will then get you back when there is a room full of people. Do you know what I mean? It's just
Yeah, that's it.
1+1. It's a 1+1 game.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. That's it. Right. Well, we'll wrap it up there, James. Thank you so
Very
much
good.
for doing this. I really, really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, yeah, of course, man, of course. Honestly, I really, really appreciate you doing this, mate.
Pleasure. Absolutely good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's so nice to see you again as well. So, mate,
Cheers.
all the
Bye.
best. See you, mate.